On.
Okay. As most of you know now, you've known me for 24 hours, and you all know that trains is my life and my passion and everything else, and that'll never change. Anyway, I just want to ask you guys, you know, you're not obviously train buffs or whatever, but when you're stopped at a crossing and a train's going by, do you ever take time to think, how's that train actually get over the road as far as going from point A to point B? I'm not talking about the fuel for the locomotive, I'm talking about the actual rules that they have to adhere to get across the road safely in conjunction with the trains. You ever think about that? It's something you probably never even give a thought to, or you're riding on a train, Well, I want to talk about how with the technology today, when trains get across the road, there's GPS out there, particularly with West Coast Express. You know, they always know we're at the station by GPS. We have centralized traffic control, which are signals that are controlled by a train dispatcher in the case of the CPR in Calgary, if you're on the CNR in Edmonton. So if you're riding the West Coast Express, train dispatcher is 600 miles away controlling the signals. And so it's very automated today, but that wasn't always the case. Back in the late 1800s, when the railroads really got going, the CPR, of course, became a cross-Canada railroad in 1885 after driving the last spike in Craigielachi, but it was very primitive back then, of course, with communication. There was no phones. The only communication the railroads had, it was Morse code. And that Morse code stayed around for quite some time into the 20th century. And then, of course, after Alexander Graham Bell got telephones going, then they did use telephones to an extent, teletypes and everything else. But they didn't have the signals as they have today. They didn't have, like this is what, not a very good map, but this is what you call a centralized traffic control board. So the train dispatcher in Calgary, he has a board that looks like this today, and these dots are the actual signals and the stations, locations. But back in at one time, they didn't have that, and you had to have train orders. So now you're going to ask me, well, what the hell is a train order? I'm going to tell you what a train order is, and I'm going to show you a real train order. First job I had on the railroad for 2 years, I wasn't a train conductor. I worked in the train stations, and I was what you call a train order operator. And I started that in 1977, and that was back in Smiths Falls and Ottawa and Montreal, back in Eastern Canada. And I was on the tail end of that very antiquated way of doing business. The Morse code was gone by the time I had started, but we still had train orders. We still had old scissors phones that we used to take these onion skin train orders with. So just while I'm talking here, I'm going to pass this along. I will need it back in a minute. But those are train orders that with onion skin paper. This is what the actual clearance, and then the actual train orders were underneath. One could be a restriction for a train. Well, while you guys are looking at the orders, time and schedules. One of the things Kathy mentioned earlier today, I believe she said about schedules and time. You know, trains have to run on time and have to be very efficient. Well, in today's world on the railroad, freight trains don't have a schedule. Freight trains just go whenever the cargo's ready to go and they decide to order a train because of this kind of technology here today. But when you had this technology, which I'm going to go over in a minute with train orders, schedules were very important, and time was very important. And one thing I forgot to bring today, which I apologize for, my wife said, bring one of your pocket watches. I have the old pocket watches, and I forgot to bring that today, and I really regret that. But in those days, when there was no signals and train orders, and you had to make meets, and a passenger train was scheduled to be at a certain location at a certain time, and you were coming on the opposing direction, you better get your train in the clear at least 5 minutes before that passenger train was due there, or guess what could happen? You have what we call a cornfield meet ahead on. You know what that means. Not a very good situation. So schedules, meets, very important. So the train station. Now, the train station was where I worked. I worked in stations. And that was the office where trains would come to a point and have to get more train orders, and also where they have all their supplies and everything else. And again, they had the Morse code. You know, you probably saw the old westerns. And again, I have a Morse code set at home in my collection, my museum. I don't know how to use it though because it was gone before I started. But as I say, they had the teletype and the scissors phones and everything else. So if I was an operator, which I did, I worked at the train stations. So the train dispatcher would call me on this loud bell would ring, and I'd have the scissors phone, put the headset over my ears, push a little pedal down to talk, and then he would issue a train order, as you have there. So this is an example of a train order. This was actually a place I worked in, Ontario Carleton Place near Ottawa. And so he would give the order. I would have to repeat the order, which I'm going to illustrate here in a minute. And you had to talk like an auctioneer. And I'll tell you why in a second. And this was one of the most important orders you could think of. Because once he issued you this order, and you repeat it to him, it could not be changed or altered. Because supposing you say, oh, I got to redo it because I want to get the period right, and then you might put a different town on there. And I'm going to go over the order how I would repeat it to him. And you had to actually numbers, that's the engine number. You would have to actually spell them out, and you had to do it fast. So he'd give me the order, and I would repeat it as such. Order number 19Y, train order number 234, TWOT, FOUR, to number 1, O&E at Carleton Place, period. This is the body of the train order. Number 1, which is a passenger train, O&E, engine 1410, O&E, FOUR, O&E, NOUGHT, meet number 2, TWO 1418, O&E, FOUR, O&E, EIGHT at Cobden, period. And then he'd say, okay, repeat it at 1438, 1438, RSM, those were his initials. And I'd say, repeat it at 1438, 1438, RSM, and acknowledged by Operator Cowan at 1438. The reason you didn't want to change that after, back in 1957, before John Diefenbaker became Prime Minister, he was a lawyer. And there was a train order operator who had the same job I did, somewhere in the Jasper, Alberta area. I don't think it was at Jasper Station, but a station nearby. He had went through the whole exercise, and I guess he changed the order and put a different town on. And guess what? As a result of that, there was 2 trains that hit. I think one was a, what do you call it, military train, troop train. Anyway, so he was up on charges of, I think, manslaughter, because it's a serious offense. Anyway, but John Diefenbaker defended him, and he got him off on a technicality. John Diefenbaker became well known for that case. And when I would do this order, I'll tell you, I would always be kind of worried about that. So now, the next thing is, let's illustrate. You wonder what the heck these things are here. These are called train order hoops. So the engine would come by, I would put the orders, I'm going to do it in the smaller one because this is for the locomotive and it's a little, oh, I guess the staples came up. Okay, don't worry, just leave that, you hang on to that for a minute. So I would take the orders like this, put them in this hoop, like this. Hang on. Okay, so we'll do that. This is the one with the locomotive. So you would go up like this, hold it up like this. The engineer would come by, because if you had an order, you had to push a thing with like a little semaphore, and if it was at yellow, that means he had to slow down and take the orders, and he'd put his arm through it like that as he was going by, take the orders out and throw it in the field. You'd have to go and pick it up. And for the caboose or for the conductor on the passenger train, if he doesn't have to stop, how about you hold this for me? Just hold it, okay? Now I'm pretending I'm on the bottom platform of a caboose. We're going by about 40 miles an hour. I grab it like this. And you let go. I would take the orders out, throw the hoop. Now I'd have to go pick the operator, I'd have to go and pick it up. First time I did that in Renfrew, Ontario, 1977. I was so nervous. This big locomotive was coming, the freight train from Vancouver, and I grabbed it like this, held it so hard, I fell over my rear end. The engineer was so worried, he called me on the radio. Are you okay? I said I was fine. Anyway, so today, this is how it is today, CTC. The train dispatcher in Calgary sees how we are, where you are. Here, like he sees the West Coast Express trains. This is Mission. This is in the Fraser Canyon. He wants to put a train in here with signals, run a train the other way. It's so much simpler than the train orders. And it makes it so train crews don't have to do as much responsibility. So it's very modern today. That's the technology of the railroad today. And that was, as I say, how I started my career. And I've seen so many changes in the railroad with the technology since I started till the time I retired in 2012. So anyway, that's how the railroad started. I know it's a passion I have, and it is